Thank you for listening to this training audio. We hope it inspires and equips you. This recording is by Stephen Whittaker, speaking on launching the vision for children and young people at the Open the Door Children's Ministry Conference on the 29th of February 2020.
In your conference packs, you've got a document that looks a little bit like that. Now, it's entirely up to you whether you want to look at it whilst I speak to you. You don't need to. It's quite a detailed piece of work, and you might want to spend a bit of time reading it. Equally, if you find that what I'm saying is boring, then just dive straight into it, have a read, and at least you can entertain yourselves whilst I'm speaking. Failing that, there's always, a little bit of Googling on eBay and trying to buy a few dodgy products. So that would be good. I wanted to spend some time with you this morning just explaining to you a little bit of the journey of this document and also what we hope it might do. And I want to try and lead you, if I can, into some of the thoughts and reflections that you might take away to your churches. I'm very conscious that everything that I say to you, or most of what I say to you, you will listen to and think, well, of course we think that. And of course, that's what we should be doing. And if you don't think that, then you need to leave now. You will think that because, of course, you are working with children and young people in your churches. In many respects, this is preaching to the choir. But the challenges that we have, I think, within our churches is trying to cascade some of our thinking and some of our kind of passion for children and young people's work to the wider congregation and to the statutory bodies, if you like, the PCC of our churches and the church wardens and the places where we start to see some traction gained in terms of active change within our churches. So what I hope to do is equip you with an overview of what this vision is about, but also with a few little kind of levers and tools to take back to church to say, let's just see if we can explore some of this and use the document as an opportunity to stimulate the discussion. So that's my intention, and I hope that we'll kind of march through that and get there in reasonable order. I'd like to give some opportunities for you to just have a chat on your tables at different times. So I hope that's going to be useful, but at the same time, I'm conscious that we want to be marching through a little bit, so you might not get very long. So I'm just warning you now that you don't think, oh, what a rude young man, old man actually, who's interrupted our conversation. So I'll try to just make sure that we kind of keep going and we steer it on track. In essence, the document starts with a lot of what Sam delivered to you, is it last year? Last year. All about Generation Z. And a little bit of, if this is the place of our young people, where is the voice of church in this? How do we respond? So we have these digitally native young people, and one of the question marks that has prompted us as a Board of Education on the back of that is, if 92% of 5 to 15-year-olds are actively engaged in a social life online, why aren't we as church in that space? So it may not have escaped your notice that there seems to have been significantly more digital content that is coming out from the Board of Education. And this is a direct response to us reflecting on that exact thing. So the Podlets is a start on that, but there's a whole raft of things that we're hoping to do that will start to engage with children and young people online. So my question to you would be, in your church contexts, how are you thinking about how you connect with children and young people in this way? Most churches haven't delved into that forum. So how are you going to do it? And if you think, do you know what? I would love to engage in this, but I don't really know much about it, then I'm pleased to tell you that we have a team of people who are here today who can talk you through that process. And the only equipment that you need to be able to venture into this territory is a phone. Now, bearing in mind, my father-in-law has a phone. His phone won't do this. So not every phone will do it, but I would imagine that most phones, he's still got one of those that's, like the Star Trek flip-up ones, but most phones would do it. So if you're thinking to yourself, how can we start to invade this space? What's the first step that we should do as church that might start to engage in this way, that's not scary for us, that gives us an opportunity to engage? Then Lindsay and Dave will be on the stall at the top, and they would love to talk through your first steps into that social digital platform. So that's just a bit of a kind of an aside, but it's directly relevant. And we start with some of that and say, if this is part of the children's cultural heritage, where are we as church in that? I'm going to share with you some stats that you'll have seen many times before. And I think it's quite an interesting one. We talk about it all the time, and this is also in here. Useful research, because it just prompts us into action a little bit. So if we summarise, 76% of Christians came to faith before the age of 18. We start to see the importance of working with people of those ages. Just out of interest, I think it'll be interesting, we're quite a big number in here. I did this at a Deanery Synod meeting on Monday, and it was really interesting, the response that we got. I wonder whether you would just for a moment stand if you came to faith before the age of 18. If you can't stand, then give us a bit of a wave so I can just kind of see. So it's an interesting exercise, isn't it? And I do that because as you look around now, you look and you think, oh my goodness me. It's right. In fact, actually, 76 might be a bit on the low side. So if you did this in your church, what would the response be? And sometimes we need visual tools like this to impress upon people within the congregation that this is quite an important statistic. And it directs the way in which we engage with our children and our young people. Thank you. Sorry, do sit down. I'm not going to make you stand forever. There's probably, I can add on to that, another chunk of people, which is the university years, 18 to 24. There's another chunk there that's a high percentage group. And possibly those who were not stood may have stood if I'd have added it up to 24. If we said to you, how many people above the age of 25 come to faith, then actually that statistic is very small. And if you go up towards the over 50s, and I'm almost there, if you get to that age, very small percentage of people come to faith above that age. So in terms of where we as Christians can have the greatest impact, it's in the formation of our young people. So we put the statistics in the vision because it's important that people are aware of them. But although usually what I get, when you share any statistics, somebody says to you, yes, but any statistics can be made to say anything. Well, then do what I've just done with you. Because actually, let's just test that theory. And I had no idea how many people were going to stand up, but I have a reasonable guess. So if we're going to just start to articulate this conversation within our churches, then some of the tools that we need to kind of amplify it and demonstrate it is part of that. So that's one stat, really important. Here's another one. Around about 60% of people wander from their faith before the age of 24. And actually, if you put those two stats together, it says to you that the children and young people's age band is a critical piece of work within our churches. This is the formation of our church. It's the formation of us. I came to faith myself, probably, well, it's a bit of an elongated journey, but I would say initial steps at the age of 11 and pretty much a firm commitment at the age of 15. That story is kind of everywhere, and teenagers particularly have lots of questions. There are challenges to faith. We're in a society that doesn't really think that faith has a place. So it's not surprising really to see that people start to drift away from their faith. And it kind of says to us as church, actually we need to be answering those questions and we need to be supporting those young people. So I know I'm telling you, but you already know. I know you're going to say, yes, we know this, Stephen, just get on with it. But the background is important, and it's important in sharing it with the church community at large. Not just the organisational structures, not just your priest. And to be honest, most of the priests get it, absolutely get it. Where the sticking points tend to fall is in the wider congregation. So these are the things that we need to start to engage with. So there are two kind of key strands. These are the overarching objectives of our vision. Bear in mind, please, this is the vision of the Board of Education for what we would love to see across the diocese. But with the best will in the world, we can support, but we cannot do. because it is the churches who deliver on this. You know that. You know you've got those young people. So it's all very well for me to make all this noise, but in the end, actually, it's about what churches do. And the one thing that I would say on behalf of everybody in our team is we are desperate to try and support you in doing anything that you can that can help to transform the lives of children and young people. And so if you feel we are a bit stuck, then we would love to support you. So that's my kind of plea, really, in doing that. So I don't need to read them to you. I think you'll have had a bit of a glance as you've been sat there. There's clearly nothing in there that we would not say, absolutely, that is what we want. These are our key goals. We want to see young people on fire with a love for Jesus and a passion to share that. So absolutely what we want to see. Within the document then, we've started to break down some kind of key levers, some key vision statements that are ways in which we think that churches might start to unlock the potential of their children and young people's work. So I'm going to go through each of these levers, these kind of key titles, and then I want to just allow a little bit of time to think about that a little bit further. So the first one, it's in no particular order, this. We want to see children from an early age given opportunity and encouragement to communicate the gospel with boldness. So, great, that's what we want to see. We want to see them be leaders in the church. Now, leaders, you'll notice, is in inverted commas. And that's because I think it needs a little bit of unpacking in terms of what we mean by that and what we expect to see. But we want to see children involved in music, prayer, teaching, to be active partners in creatively driving forward the mission of the church. It's about a raising of status of our children and young people to a place where they are active participants. Now, I think leaders needs a little bit of unpacking, and probably what I would like to suggest to you is something of an apprenticeship model. So Gardner, in his book, The Unschooled Mind, 1972, you wouldn't think it's particularly current, but actually makes a great play about the important role of apprentices within workplace, and actually does loads of kind of unpacking of the place of schools and education in being that kind of role model for the apprentice and how we deal with the apprentice. And I think when we start to think about children and young people as leaders within our church, the apprenticeship model is quite a good one. Because within the apprenticeship model, we have, first of all, modelled behaviours, we have modelled understanding, and so we are, from a very early age, demonstrating to our children and young people what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And so some of what we do as adults has a direct impact on those children. So I think one of the first things we need to be aware of is as adults in church, what are we presenting? There's in Paul's letter to Titus, there's a whole raft of really useful statements about what elders in the church should be like. And actually, if you start to unpack some of that, ultimately, we should be self-controlled and we should be a model of the gospel. We should be there so that people are encouraged to engage with the gospel. So as adults in church, it's really important that we seek to do that. And how do we impress that upon our wider church community? Just that modelling process. The other thing, of course, is that in the apprenticeship model, we train, we encourage, and we allow opportunities for people to do. And that do starts off with some supervision, but then it becomes a more distant supervision as that doing is allowed to happen. And then there's feedback and correction and encouragement. And that apprenticeship model is something where there is not disengagement. We don't just launch somebody off and say, right, go on, off you go, get on with it, and we'll just see how you go on. There is a whole kind of load of leading up to it. Crossing the road is another good analogy, actually. If you were teaching a child to cross the road, you wouldn't stand them on the side of the road and say, look, here's a road, these are cars, they can kill you, you need to be careful, right, off you go, and leave them to it. We would model some of those practices, and we would hold the hand of a child for a period of time whilst we cross the road, and we model that practice. But eventually we get to the point where we need to let go, and they need to still be able to, but we're still there. And then we get to a point where they've got to do it on their own, and we'll check in afterwards. That first journey to high school, when your child goes to high school and they're crossing the road, is, from a parent's point of view, is a bit anxious, because it's the first time really properly that you've kind of let them go. And there's something about that. There is an anxiety in that. And I think when we're encouraging young people and children to be leaders within our churches, there are often bits of anxiety that sit alongside it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but we still need to allow them that opportunity. But then what do? We check in with them. How did you go on? What happened? Was it okay? How busy was it? We start to unpack a little bit of what their experience was. And this model of leadership is a really useful one, where we work with our children to unpack where they've had a leadership opportunity. How did you go on with it? What did you feel about that? What could we do differently? Have we got any partnered work? So lots of times children lead intercessions, or can lead intercessions in church. And how do we get to the place where we release them, if you like, to do it with a fairly remote supervision? Well, we'll do it together. We might write it together. We might share it together. We might speak it together. We might model some of that together, and eventually we say, right, off you go, over to you. And then after that, though, we need to come back and say, how did you feel about that? And did you feel that you were leading prayer? What did the congregation feel about it? It's fascinating when you start to kind of delve into that, because it's quite hard in churches to get away from the R factor. So when a child leads intercessions, the congregation sit there and go, oh, it's lovely. Isn't it lovely to see that? And yes, it is. But are we engaged in praying with those individuals, or are we just sat there thinking, this is lovely to see those young people stood up there saying prayers? And I think it's trying to push people and just kind of take them along that journey a little bit. And that's part of the conversation with the congregation. So leadership needs unpacking. Let's unpack it a little bit with a question. What opportunities are there in your church for the young to lead? What opportunities are there? What do you get? So I've given you one example of intercessions, but that's only one. What other opportunities are there? How many times do we give young people the opportunity to lead worship, to lead in song, to lead in Bible reading? If you think about your average Sunday morning service, how many opportunities are there for children and young people to have opportunities to lead? Now, bearing in mind, we've supported all of this. Is the apprenticeship model, so it's supported, it's guided. It might not be necessarily on their own up front. It might be as part of a family unit or part of a unit that's guiding those young people. But what opportunities have you had? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Have a little chat in your church. How many opportunities? Okay, I apologise in advance for cutting short your conversation. I'm going to do it a lot. Let's just take a little bit of feedback. What was your immediate reaction? What was your immediate reaction to that question? So does anybody want to just share an initial thought? We'll take a couple of thoughts and then I'm going to move you on to another bit of a provocation. So Dave's got a mic. Is anybody prepared to just kind of throw in your thoughts on that? That'd be useful.
We're just saying that we feel that as our church would actually be quite up for the kids taking part in these things and leading these things. But on a Sunday morning, our kids have left the main body of the church, if you like, or the wrinkly bit of the church, and gone to their own teaching and worship before they get the chance to see prayers or lead prayers, to see the Bible reading or lead the Bible reading. So actually they've left before those opportunities.
So to be really controversial, my pushback to that would be, if we have this conversation within our church, and that might well be the feedback, well, we'd love to, but they've all gone. Now, it depends how you do it. I would hope there's some time where the whole group are together, but maybe there isn't. But that's perhaps a part of a conversation. Is it possible, heaven forbid, to restructure the liturgy? Oh, no! In order to allow opportunity.
We don't have any liturgy, sorry.
Well, in that case, it's dead easy. But for those churches where there's liturgy, we often go through that focus. So is there opportunity? I'm not asking. I'm going to throw the questions at you. I'm not pretending I have all the answers, but I want to just make sure that we're throwing the questions so that these are the same questions that I think need to be discussed as part of a church organisation. The answers actually will be very specifically related to individual churches. But it's about how do we engage in this conversation in a way that moves it forward from just saying, well, we'd love to have more children and young people, to, well, what things could we practically do that might start to make that change? Let me move you on to another objective. We'd love to see children and young people commit to follow Christ as Lord and Saviour and understand what that means. Do you know what? I don't think that is particularly challenging in the sense that we'd all love to see that. That is absolutely front and centre of what we would want to do. So my question for you to just reflect on is this. How is your church missional with children and young people? How is your church? What are you actually doing? How is it missional? What are you doing that might encourage children and young people to engage with Jesus? What are you actually doing? 30 seconds, have a think. Let's just draw that conversation together a little bit. Anybody want to throw in what we're doing to be directly missional? Anyone want to just throw out a comment there? How is your church intentionally looking to be missional with children and young people? Anybody got a comment, a thought? Is that a particularly challenging question?
I'm going to say something a bit controversial. I have 3 here from our team at St Peter's Burnley, and I think we do an excellent job with our children and young people. We're a big group, and our vicar is brilliant. They do an awful lot in family service, and we have a reasonable sized group of teenagers up to the age of 17, but what we're not missional with is the whole of our congregation don't necessarily feel comfortable, and they need to do a lot more than they're doing, and we're just thinking of things where they should perhaps get on the readers' rota. They could do intercessions. We've got morning prayer tomorrow, which is very unusual. They still come in Sunday school. They could come out and do the intercessions. They come out and in rota, some of them are do the books and they come and do the collection, but they could do a lot more. But I think our stumbling block would be with a good group of children's people that do a lot of work, but we've also got a reasonable sized group of people that we say, whoa, that wouldn't be as comfortable with that.
And I think that this is, because actually what we do when we ask questions about children and young people in church, actually we ask questions about church generally. So, you know, you could just throw as a random aside, what is the culture of welcome at your church? Well, that has a big impact on families and children and young people, but actually has a big impact with everybody. So what's the welcome like? And it kind of fits into that. How are we missional with children? How are we missional with everybody? And so actually, there might be a knock-on effect of this, of starting to articulate a conversation within your church community about this vision might prompt conversations about the wider church community. And that's great. I don't think there's a problem with that. It's not really our brief to do that, but it is interwoven. You can't escape from it. Let me just throw another one at you. We long to see churches and families equipped to teach and disciple their children and young people so they feel valuable, loved in their relationship with God, and a hunger to learn more. I think, well, that is an interesting one, isn't it? And this is the question that I would kind of prompt you with. How do we equip families to be confident in living out their faith? Last year in this conference, there was a whole conversation about, you know, what are we doing to equip families to support their children in the development of faith? 40% on that statistic came to faith below the age of 5, I think it was, which basically says was absolutely brought up in a Christian family that were intentional in sharing their faith with the young people that were there. My family was one of those. So from a very early age, you know, there was no question that I had an understanding of who Jesus was and what it was to have a faith in Jesus. I didn't actually make my own commitments until later on, but it was there. But we also knew from last year that a very small percentage of Christians believe it's their job to tell this to their children. And so there's a sense of, as church, how are we trying to equip families? How do we help them? Now, from our point of view, this is a good question for us because we're desperately trying to provide some resource that can help families to engage in these conversations of faith with their children. So if we can give you the tools to engage in that conversation, we think that's great. We'd love to do that. But from a church point of view, This is a little bit about, it's the same kind of thing, a little bit about how are we helping our adults to understand their discipleship journey and develop in it so that they too can lead their children into a discipleship journey. So there's a bigger question here, and it might go beyond just our engagement with children and young people. But, how are we equipping our families? There's a question mark here. We had a good debate at the senior staff team about this in terms of, actually, where in the diocese should the support come from this? Well, I would argue everywhere. It should come from everywhere. And if we can play a part in that, great. But we're not the only people who can play a part in that. And so it's maybe part of ministry training. And it's part of, how do we do that? It's got to come from everywhere. So let's move on to another one. We want to see, we aspire to see churches instilling the same confidence as children as they do in adults. And we go on with another statement, which is deliberately provocative. And I'm going to encourage you, I'm going to get you to do an activity, and I'm going to encourage you to do something similar in church. It will cause some nice fights. We long to see churches that deliver a one-to-one correlation between the work with adults and the work with those under the age of 18. So I'm just going to stop there for a moment because I want you to just kind of process that for a minute because there's a lovely logic that sits behind this. So my logic that sits behind it is simple. If 75%, 76% of people come to faith below the age of 18, surely this should be, in our church, number one priority. 3/4 of our worshipping congregation will come from this age demographic. So if you said that, actually one-to-one correlations is wrong. Because it should be 2-to-1 in favour of children and young people. But let's just stick with 1-to-1 because that's going to be challenging enough. I want you to just have a little think. So I was just mulling this one over and I thought, well, here we go. We'll have a little chart. So have a little think about your church. So within your church, how many activities within your church are designed for and delivered for adults? So I want you to think in the broad spectrum of what goes on in your church. So flower groups, Bible study groups. I want you to think about social activities, midweek communions, evening services. How many are adult focused? How many are child focused? And I've thrown in a non-missional group, Brownies, but I'll give you that one. And how many are genuinely multi-generational? So Messy Church is a good example of that. That's parents and children together. What do you think in your church the correlation is? Have a think. I'm going to stop you for a minute, just as you're totting up your scores. I'd be intrigued, really. Rather than take some individual feedback, I'd be just intrigued. Does anybody feel that their church is close to, I'll give you close to, is close to a one-to-one correlation of activity? So that's good. That's good. Yeah, quite close to. That's good. How many feel that is, has anybody gone the 2-to-1 in favour of children and youth? Feeling optimistic? Yes. Good stuff. Is anybody feel that the proportions are actually more adult focused? Now, I'll come to some of the breakdown of that in a minute, but one of the things that I think is interesting in that is we in the Board of Education have used some nice provocative language, and we like to do it, to say, is your church a church that discriminates against the young? It's a good question. It's a good question. Because the reaction that you get is a passionate pushback. And I like that because it means we're talking about children and young people. In terms of, I'm very sorry because I'm going to throw out these questions, but we won't have time to be able to have the debate. And I can see that people are itching to put me straight. But I want you to understand the tone in which I share this with you. I'm deliberately seeking to provoke. And the reason I do that is I deliberately want to give you opportunities to use this document to provoke in your local church. Because for me, there's this passion that exists actually. The church generally, if you talk to anybody in the church, they would want to see more children and young people. But the problem is, at what cost? What are you prepared to change in order to make this happen? And you can't have that conversation unless you start to use some of these levers to just unpick it. Now, I don't think it's as simplistic as saying we just need to have a different correlation, but I think it's a useful tool to start the conversation. To say, actually, if at the end of that conversation, churches intentionally seek to change some of the things that they do that has a positive impact on our engagement with children and young people, that's got to be a good thing. So please, I'd love to have the debate all day long, but I kind of want you to just hear where I'm going with it, and some of the questions are rhetorical as opposed to expecting an answer. But the other thing to just mull over is that if you've got those one-to-one correlations, are they across the whole kind of gambit of discipleship? So are they across worship, prayer, Bible study, development, questioning? Are they social? Now, that might come back to a conversation about what is happening with your church generally, not just with children and young people. But so my second question would be, if you've got a one-to-one correlation, is that across that journey of discipleship? Now, it may be, but those are good questions to ask. How are we helping to form our children and young people? Let's just march on a little bit, because Sam will be getting itchy because he follows me. We want to see churches that help to develop service in our young people, equipping them to engage in apologetics. So I've got a couple of questions. We'll not dwell on them for too long, but hopefully you can take these away as a thought. How do we enable our young people to serve? I actually think this is the bit that most churches have got most sorted. But it's a good question to ask. How we enable our children and young people to serve in the broadest sense. So whether that's within worship, within church, or actually outside of that, their community. How are we engaging as a transforming body on our communities? And how are we enabling our young people to share their faith? It comes back to that apprenticeship model, doesn't it? We need to give opportunities for children to ask questions that others might ask them of their faith. They need to have tested some of those things themselves in order to share their faith. But equally, they don't need to have the most secure and rounded and fully theologically based faith to begin to be able to share what it means to love Jesus. But we need to be guiding and supporting those young people in that journey. And we know that if somebody seeks to share or teach others something that they know, they deepen their own understanding. So it's got to be done with that adult support. But crucially important, how are we going about that in our church? What's in our action plan that's going to deliver on that particular aspect? A good question for churches to just ponder. Another one is we've got a direct objective in here about toddler groups. And there's a huge amount of interest and development of toddler groups. Most of our churches have some form of preschool activity. There's a vast number of them. And they vary from somebody who hires the hall to the church running something directly that's got biblical content. And there's a whole kind of raft of stuff in between. So I think when we're looking about that, the question I would ask you is how do we look at toddler provision in church? How intentional is it? Now, it might be intentional in that it has content that explores faith, worship, prayer, the Bible. It might be that actually churches intentionally run a group where people from the church come alongside families, get to know them, and it becomes a gateway into the worshiping life of church. So the content of the toddler session is not necessarily directly missional, but there is clear intention to engage with families and bring them into church. And it's not just that we hope they might pop along, that there's engagement in conversation with those mums. Christian mums are there to have a conversation, it's usually mums, sorry, with other mums in order to kind of just explore issues of faith and encourage them to be part of it. So it's the intentionality. So I just want to mull over. Do you have a toddler group that comes into your church premises? Is it run by you? Is it run by somebody else? Do you have any engagement with that? How could you move that engagement to the next level? How do you start to be a bit more intentional with that group? So they're just questions. You might already be, but they're just thoughts and questions in terms of how you might do it. So what should we do? I've got a very short video that starts to unpick some of the things that we can do. One of the things I'd suggest to you is to take away these little prompts, levers, provocations, and have a conversation in your church about how you might engage in a discussion with the wider congregation. I mean, you might start with a PCC, but how do you get a conversation with the wider congregation? How do we start to do this? Because we're not great, actually, as churches at trying to get a consensus of view from the church community. And I'm not sure the annual meeting is necessarily the place where you're going to get the most engagement, but it might be. But there's a conversation about how do we start to do something with this. Right. I'll find it in a minute. There we go. So I'm hoping, it might take me a minute because my Wi-Fi is a bit iffy, so I'm going to try and tether it to my phone. But I've got a little video for you that comes from Chelmsford Diocese. It's not a particularly new video, but it's quite a useful one. In that it's essentially talking to young people about their experience of church, and it's the full gambit of young people. So it just gives you a sense about where this is. So I'm going to hope, with a great hope, that this might play. Come on, phone. Well, we were all right earlier. It was always a technical problem. Oh, I was getting a bit excited for a minute. It might actually do something. No, well, we'll maybe come back to it a little bit later on. It was always a potential that it wouldn't pan out. The video is a useful one. If you go to Chelmsford Diocese, it's on their homepage. If you go to their youth section, it's on their homepage. All it is a number of young people. We'll see if we can get it going a bit later on, who are talking about what it means to be listened to, essentially, and what their place is in the church community. One of the things that we can do that has great impact is that we can talk to children. So within our churches, do we have an opportunity where we speak to our children and ask them questions about what they would like in the formation of faith? Do we engage in activities, that can explore what helps them to engage in church more readily? So Chelmsford have got the Learn to Listen. No, I always forget the name of it. Some lovely resources. They're very accessible. You can use them for all manner of different things. A number of churches have used them in the appointment of their new incumbent by getting a voice from the children. And there's some little games and activities that means that rather than doing the interrogation technique with the big floodlight and a child saying, "What do you think of worship?" it can be a little bit more open in the sense that we can play some games and that can help to unpick it. One of the things that I would encourage all churches to do is to talk to the children, to hear what they say, but then, this is the important bit, then to respond. Churches are good at asking the questions, but if the answers are difficult, then they're not very good at responding. So it's how do we respond in a way that respects and honours that child's position and marries that with, what the church wants. So, if they want a helter-skelter down the middle of the nave, you can respond to that and say, well, we think that would be great, but there are a few practical problems. For a start, the archdeacon might not like it. But there's ways, but I think we need to think about not only how we ask the questions, but how we respond. And if there are some genuine responses from children about what they experience in worship or what opportunities they would like, then I think we are obliged as church to respond to that and seek to make that happen. If I come back to the beginning, if we don't do that, then we are losing generations of future church. I mean, they are the church of today as well. But it doesn't take a genius to work out that with those statistics, without children and young people in our churches, we are going to cease to exist. And quite a number of churches do this very, very well. It's not true to say the church is in decline. There are aspects of the church that is in decline. But actually, the Christian faith is strong. And perhaps some of our church structures are getting in the way, and that's what we need to think about. Put the debate in the centre of your church decision-making bodies. So this is what I want to encourage you to do. use this document, say, look, the Board of Education have sent this out. There's loads of stuff in it that I don't agree with, but we should talk about it. Just to get it into that debate, get it into the decision-making process, because what we're really keen on is there have been reports in 1972, 1995, there's probably one in the 80s, there's probably one in the early 2000s. They all say the same thing. Growing Faith report currently says the same thing. Churches have been aware of the problem, but they have not done anything to address it. They talk a good game, but they don't do. So we run the risk of repeating that. Here we are again having the same debate from 1972, and not much has changed apart from there are now less children in our churches than there were in 1972. So I think we can't just complacently say, well, let's just carry on. We have to do something, which is what I come to the bottom there. Do something. And it's about doing something, actually. And if this provokes one change in your church that can have an impact on children and young people being part of your worship, however small that is a great step. Because at the moment, we're not seeing that. And certainly not consistently. We see it in pockets around different churches, but we don't see it consistently. There's a Growing Faith initiative from the Church of England. I'd encourage you to look at that. It talks about the intersections between home, church and school, those middle bits. How do we engage in those middle bits? I've not laboured it because you can read that to your own, to your heart's content. But I would encourage you to take this away, use it as a tool to engage in the conversation in your local churches. I'm going to hand over to Sam. Thank you very much.
We hope that you've enjoyed listening to this talk. For more resources and training, please visit the resource area at bdeducation.org.uk.